hard to imagine. It's laid bare existing challenges and inequities while upending daily life and threatening the health and economic security of people across our state. But it's also shown the strength, resilience, and innovation of North Carolinians and made clear why our state's future is so bright. We'll put this pandemic behind us sooner rather than later. With the right investments, we can ensure our state roars back, creating opportunity for all of our people, not just those at the top. This is the time to find opportunity in crisis. With the right priorities, we'll not only beat this pandemic, but build lasting success for North Carolina. The most important recommendations today will invest in North Carolina's people so they can learn, get healthier, and get the right kind of training for great jobs. Businesses searching for skilled workers and a high quality of life keep heeding our calls to come here and expand. But as we work to right the inequities exposed by the pandemic, we need to make sure that everyone is ready for their opportunity to succeed. The most critical investments need to be made in early childhood education and our public schools. This budget provides more for pre-K and early learning, which science overwhelmingly proves starts children on the right path to success. This budget also works to make good on our state's constitutional duty to make sure that every child has access to a sound basic education. We know how to do that. Attract and keep good teachers with competitive pay, and recruit young people to make teaching a career. Make sure students and adults are ready for careers in high-demand fields of employment. Provide the right resources for students with the greatest needs. Another priority in this budget is making sure people are healthy and have access to quality health care to keep them that way. Vaccines are beating back this pandemic, but the affordable health care needs will persist long after this pandemic is over. We must get health care to more working people, and the best way to do that is to expand Medicaid. It ensures more than 500,000 people without state tax dollars. It creates jobs. It helps save rural hospitals. It makes private health insurance less expensive. It gives many more people access to mental health and drug treatment. How do we know all that? Because the data from the 39 states that have expanded it shows us. Now, I know legislative leaders in the past have opposed it, and they've had their reasons, which I've listened to. But 3 major changes have occurred since we struggled over this issue in the last budget. First, the global pandemic has cost hundreds of thousands of North Carolinians their employer-sponsored health insurance. Second, the Federal American Rescue Plan has opened the door wider with billions of dollars to encourage states that haven't expanded to join. And third, on July the 1st, North Carolina will dramatically change how it manages the Medicaid system in a way legislative leaders wanted to take better care of tax dollars. Red states across the country are already making moves. I'm ready to work with legislative leadership and members of both political parties here in North Carolina to find a way forward. Access to good health care and education will get our state ready for the jobs that are already coming. As we've seen with job announcement after job announcement in recent weeks, our economy is moving, and we're telling employers around the world that North Carolina is ready and open for business. This budget sends that signal by encouraging innovation and linking to new industries, biotechnology research, medical manufacturing, clean energy production. This will help businesses in our state, both large and small. And as I've said, the pandemic has underscored the inequities in our state. Simply put, it's hitting those with lower incomes much harder than those at the top. The needs are stark. Housing, food, employment, health care. Any state pandemic recovery must tackle these inequities. This budget recommends reinstating the Earned Income Tax Credit to help those with lower incomes keep more of the money that they earn. More than 900,000 people in our state claimed the federal Earned Income Tax Credit in 2018, and we need a state credit to match. A separate child and dependent care tax credit can help the tens of thousands of families who have expenses caring for their children or dependent parents and grandparents. This helps more than ever during a pandemic. State government has a responsibility to lead the way in promoting fairness. This budget provides a minimum $15 per hour wage for non-certified employees in public schools, such as bus drivers, cafeteria workers, and teacher assistants. It also makes strong investments in our teachers, community college, and university workforce, as well as our other state workers and retirees. We also want our state agencies to do more to view their work through a justice and equity lens. This means increasing the participation of minority contractors, which creates more competition and saves taxpayers money. We must also reach out to help communities of color, and in cases of criminal justice, fix the inequities. We're also recommending a $4.7 billion statewide bond initiative to be voted on by the people this fall. The bond would build new K-12 public schools and fix our aging buildings on our community college and university campuses, as well as building new buildings there. And it would bolster state parks, museums, and other sites across state government. We have a responsibility to put our children in safe, reliable classrooms, and this bond will start addressing the more than $8 billion in documented needs. Interest rates have never been lower, and our economy needs the boost. And thanks to having paid down North Carolina's debt, our state can afford it. Now is the time to address this backlog of needs. It's important to note what we left out of this state-funded budget and why. Thanks to the American Rescue Plan, some of our most pressing needs to lift communities in rural and other areas can be covered by these federal funds. This money can make important infrastructure investments like high-speed internet to make sure everyone's connected, from small businesses to people needing telehealth visits with their doctors. Housing, so people can have an affordable and dependable place to live. Special help for hard-hit businesses like the hospitality and tourism industry. Upgrades to water and sewer systems, which smaller local governments are struggling to afford. My proposed budget for North Carolina's share of the American Rescue Plan will be coming soon. This state budget availability is strong, with almost $5 billion in unreserved money in the general fund as we start the new fiscal year in July. Forecasts anticipate strong tax revenues the next 2 years and leaving recession numbers behind us as we beat this pandemic. There's no doubt that this last year has left many people facing financial hardship and temporarily robbed us of the way we lived our lives. But with the right priorities, we can recover the education and economic losses and lay a strong foundation for our future. Now I want to introduce Charlie Perouse, who was our Director of the Office of State Budget and Management. He'll share more details about the budget, and then he and I will be available for questions from the media. Charlie Perouse.
Thank you, Governor Cooper, and good afternoon, everyone. I am pleased to discuss in more detail the Governor's major investments in education, infrastructure, and health care in order to have a more equitable, inclusive economy. I'll start out with some context and preview what we will discuss in further detail today. First, we'll talk about starting from sound, firm financial footing, as the Governor mentioned. and then go directly into the substantive budget recommendations and talk about how this budget is structurally sound. We'll summarize the must-dos that are included in this budget, as well as go into more detail related to the support for North Carolina's human capital. We'll then talk about critical support across the large state government enterprises, including education, health and human services, general government, justice and public safety, agriculture, clean energy, and infrastructure and resiliency. As the governor mentioned, we are starting from a firm financial footing here in North Carolina. We in all the states have had unprecedented federal stimulus relief over the last year with 3 large federal stimulus bills that have been passed and signed. The most recent one, the American Rescue Plan, is going to provide over $5 billion to state government and $3 billion to local governments. The federal response to this pandemic has been unprecedented. In addition, the economic and revenue forecasts are much improved since May 2020. And finally, as the governor mentioned, we're starting from a good starting point this fiscal year as we have nearly $5 billion of unreserved cash in the general fund. Let's talk about investments in savings, contingencies, and emergencies. The governor's budget recommends an additional $1.1 billion to be put in the Savings Reserve Account, or better known as our Rainy Day Fund. This would increase that balance by 100% to $2.2 billion. In addition, it includes $374 million to the Medicaid Contingency and Transformation Reserves. It also provides $150 million to deal with the retiree health care OPEB liability, and $100 million for state emergencies. Let's talk about the must-dos first. These are items that are generally mandatory in nature, that are funded each and every year. They include about $1.8 billion over the next 2 years for education enrollment. That's K-12, community college, university, and private colleges and universities. In addition, it fully funds the Medicaid rebase, funds for the state health plan premiums, and retirement system contributions to keep the retirement system financially sound. As the governor mentioned, he's recommending a very strong package for educator compensation. There's many parts to it, and it totals $2.4 billion over the next 2 years. First, it includes a $2,000 bonus in May 2021, so paid in this fiscal year and in this school year, and that recognizes that educators have not received any compensation increases over the last couple years, so this bonus would be effective immediately. In addition, it includes an average 10% recurring increase for teachers and principals over the next 2 years. That's about a 5.7% increase in fiscal year 21-22, and another 4.3% increase in fiscal year 22-23, or an average of 10%. In addition, it includes a 7.5% total increase for non-certified public school employees over the next 2 years, 5% in 21-22, and another 2.5% in fiscal year 22-23. That same 7.5% total increases would be provided to all UNC and community college employees. And then on top of those recurring increases, the governor recommends also an additional $1,000 bonus for all education employees to be paid in October 2021 and October 2022. And finally, it also recommends additional funds for a living wage for non-certified employees in the public schools to ensure that all of those employees are at least paid $15 per hour. In addition, the governor has a strong package for state employees and retirees, totaling $860 million over the biennium. This includes a 5% recurring raise for state employees over the next 2 years. That's 2.5% in fiscal year 2021 and another 2.5% in fiscal year 22-23. In addition, it includes that same $1,000 bonus to all state employees in October 2021 and in October 2022. It also includes money for a public safety pay plan. It also includes targeted funds for hard to recruit and retain position and for agencies that have compression issues. And finally, and also very importantly, it includes money for a retiree recurring COLA of 2%, as well as an additional 2% retiree bonus in each fiscal year. Now we'll transition to some of the substantive expansion recommendations and investments in education. Includes over $800 million in additional funds for education over the next 2 years. Specifically, it includes $305 million of additional resources for at-risk children, children with disabilities, and limited English proficiency students. It also includes $120 million to hire up almost 1,000 additional counselors, social workers, psychologists, and nurses for our public schools. It includes $70 million for the NC Grow program and $95 million in financial aid and other programs to make higher education affordable for students. In the Health and Human Services area, it includes an additional $500 million over the next 2 years. As the governor mentioned, it recommends expanding Medicaid. It also includes $69 million in improvements to child welfare systems and services, and $30 million increase for housing and employment support for people with disabilities. Another hallmark, as the governor mentioned earlier, was strong investments in early education. It includes almost $140 million in a comprehensive early education package, which includes more monies for child care subsidies, as well as North Carolina pre-K reimbursement rates and another 1,500 slots for pre-K across the state, additional money for Smart Start, as well as early intervention services. And finally, in this area, it also includes $90 million to improve wages for early childhood and long-term care workforce. In the general government area, it includes $138 million of additional funds over the next 2 years, including $20 million for affordable housing, $18 million for enhanced analytics and audit capacity across state government, $41 million for state agency IT improvements, and $19 million for veterans and military families. It also includes almost $260 million in the justice and public safety area. This includes $48 million to recruit and retain correctional officers, $27 million for enhanced safety and security equipment, $43 million to hire additional court personnel statewide, as well as additional funds for private attorneys and indigent defense services, and $10 million for sexual assault evidence testing. In the agriculture, natural, and economic resources area, the governor recommends $191 million in additional monies over the next 2 years, including $80 million for water resource development projects, $45 million to support small businesses and agriculture, $26 million to support libraries, museums, and local arts programs, and almost $8 million in the Department of Environmental Quality to mitigate emerging compounds. Governor has a strong environment and clean energy package. In the environment area, it includes $300 million over the biennium, which the biggest part is $210 million of conservation investments in the Parks and Recreation Trust Fund and the Land and Water Fund, $56 million for floodplain buyouts, $20 million for trail construction and planning, and $10 million for farmland preservation. In the clean energy area, it includes $100 million in investments over the biennium, including $50 million in clean energy grants to schools and local governments, $15 million to recruit clean energy jobs, and $23 million to support low-income households to reduce energy costs. Finally, in the infrastructure and resiliency area, the governor's budget includes cash investments over the next 2 years of $1.1 billion. This includes a little over $600 million for UNC system campuses statewide, $324 million in state agency capital recommendations, $100 million for energy efficiency projects, and $106 million to plan and design the large bond projects that will go into more detail on the next slide. And finally, the governor's budget recommends almost $330 million in investments for large information technology projects over the next 2 years. The governor mentioned that we have an unprecedented opportunity to put a bond before the voters in November 2021. Our debt capacity is currently at $4.6 billion over the next 10 years, and we have historically low interest rates. Our most recent bond sale, we got a 1.48% interest rate, which is fantastic. The governor recommends $4.7 billion in a general obligation bond. About 80% of that bond would go to the education area, including $2.5 billion for public schools, almost $800 million for the university system, $500 million to community colleges statewide, $439 million to parks, museums, and zoo, about $430 million to health and safety projects, and then about $48 million for contingencies. The governor's budget in detail is available at the website listed there on the screen. The governor and I are available to answer questions.